Okay. Well, this is exciting. Um, Thanks for having me on board. I'm excited to do the Hannah LeGris takeover. Um, so I'm Michaela Ferroli. I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Gender and Women's Studies at the University of Kentucky. I've known Hannah for a couple of years now. We got introduced through a mutual friend. We literally just bumped into each other, I think at a Starbucks on campus a couple of years ago. And I've bumped into you here and there around Lexington, and it just sort of rolled from there. And I really appreciate and enjoy being in your company and grabbing, a drink or a coffee with you here and there. So if people have been here to Hannah for Council Facebook page before, you've seen these, you might know the format, but if you don't, um, this is kind of flipped on its head. Hannah is normally the interviewer, but today it's me. So today we'll be getting to know a little bit more about Hannah, which I'm excited about because I always love Hannah's stories. Um, Hannah LeGris is running for the 3rd District City Council, and looking to get your vote. Um, just a quick little more thing about me. My name is Michaela, as I mentioned before, and I use they, them pronouns. So Hannah, obviously we're here for you, but I would like to ask what your pronouns are.
Yes, my pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, no problem. And again, I just want to thank you for this opportunity, for me to get to know you and to get your constituents to know you a little bit better as well. So, really, just jumping right into it, I'm going to be asking you a series of questions. The audience, folks on Facebook, are also totally able to submit questions in the comment section below if you'd like, and they'll be sent to me. And I'll try to fit those in as well. This will take about, a half hour or so. And I'd really like to start off with this question. It might seem simple at first, but I think the more you try to answer it, the more difficult it might seem. We really want to know, me as a potential voter for you in the 3rd district, is who is Hannah?
Who, who am I?
Yeah, who are you? Who is Hannah LeGris?
All right. Well, people who engage with my website can see one part of my narrative, and I think that maybe this question is going beyond that. I've thought about various ways to answer a question like this, but this is pretty broad. So thank you, because you've created a lot of space. When I think about myself, I think of myself as a creative person and someone who is very invested in whatever they're working on. And for me, even though those projects have changed, some of the themes have stayed the same. I care about storytelling, writing, I care about people. I'm really interested in people's stories. And I think that's something that has brought a lot of joy to my life as a teacher. I haven't often used the word teacher to describe myself, but when I think about some of the most formative experiences I've had in my career, it's with students, because there's so much space for surprise, especially when you're working with young people who are in the process of becoming. So I would think of myself as a teacher or an educator, or a mentor, in various contexts in a way that um, is a mutually shaping
Yeah.
fashion. And I would also say that I care about my community. And I know that's a pretty broad statement. And what I mean by my community, for the past 12 years, I've met Lexington. And that has meant sometimes creating new programs. It's meant working with my students to engage with Lexington in meaningful ways and in sustainable ways. But it's also meant for me on a very interpersonal level. If I meet someone who moves to Lexington and they're like, I haven't met anybody, or I don't know where the best bread in town is, or I'm having trouble breaking in, I really want to be that person who helps share the resources of our city with other people. Um, and because I know what it's like to move here and to move to a new city and not know anyone, and to look for points of connection. And I think our students are looking for that too. You know, looking for a community can be a real process, and it's an iterative process. You know, it changes over our lives. So that's a little bit about me and who I am.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I can totally attest to that, that I think when I first met you, I was fairly new here to Lexington, and we just so happened to bump into each other walking. It was like at the end of the day, and we were walking back to, you were walking to your car or whatever, your bike, and you just, we barely knew each other, and you invited me to be a part of a book club that you had going, and that was just really eye-opening, because being a part of the UK community does not necessarily mean you're part of the Lexington community. And so I guess another question that I would like to ask you are, so you moved here from uh, Mayslick, Kentucky, is that
I
right?
I grew up in Mayslick,
Okay.
Kentucky, in Mason County, where I lived for all of my formative childhood years. And then I went to school in Northern Ohio, in a small town, a little south of Cleveland, Worcester, Ohio. Yes. So.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I would like to ask what past experiences or even current experiences with your relationship with Lexington, or even other places that you've been, I suppose. Um, how will that shape your position as a city council member?
Hmm. How will my relationship to other places, or formative experiences for me in other places, shape how I act as a city council member and how I see
Yeah.
my role?
Yeah, or even specifically with Lexington as well.
Yeah. I think that something that has been really important to me throughout my life,
Mhm.
I would hasten to say, even when I was quite young, was this feeling of wanting to be connected and to feel necessary to a place and to feel seen.
Yeah.
And growing up in rural Kentucky, I spent a lot of time in the natural landscape, like on our farm, but I didn't always feel connected socially to my home community. I felt like a little bit of an outsider. And when I moved to Lexington, I I felt like, okay, it took time, right? It took me, I remember meeting my first friend actually in Lexington. And that my friend Laura, who's still my friend today. And I remember her saying, I really like you and we're going to be friends, and I'm going to follow up with you tomorrow. And then she did it. And there was something about that. I know that's a very small gesture, but this idea of follow through and someone expressing interest and being open about that interest and that investment in you, and then actually following through with that. I think that's something that's really important to, like, actually being seen and feeling even just one point of connection, which can lead to many more. And I think in my time in Lexington, that one point of connection became multiple. And then once you start investing in a city and spending your time there and caring about the people there and thinking, what's working here? What could we do better? What are the possibilities? Then you become enmeshed in that place. Um, and that's an experience that for me, very early on in my time here, um, I thought, oh, I could build a really meaningful life here. And there are people who care a lot about our city, and I'm one of them, and I'm okay with that. I remember a friend of mine said, he said, when I decided to stay in this place, at first it felt like doors closed.
Mhm.
And he said, and yes, they did. And then what I realized was that many, many more doors opened as a result, because people know when you're sincere and when you're sincerely invested. So with Lexington, I had people who took an interest in me and helped me get sincerely invested. And I think a public servant, a city council member, and I know I experienced this personally with Jake Gibbs, and I've experienced it with other leaders like Jim Gray and Deborah Hensley and people in our community who really help make things happen, but notice the individuals and see the potential in them. And the people are a big part of what makes up a place, because people power. We can create change, and we can create new opportunities. And so I think as a city council person, I want to be that type of person who notices people and invests in them, even if we're not sure of the shape of that investment over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interpersonal relationships are so important to the feeling of a city. And just to shift a little bit, but still sort of on topic, this is a two-part question. So the first part is simply, what is city council? And how does it impact the local community, right? So what does city council do? And then the second part of that question is, what does city council mean to you?
Okay. So to answer the first part of your question, what is city council? So in Lexington, city council, we have all these different districts, and then we have council at large positions. And the people of each district vote in their councilors, and then the at-large people are voted in by all of the members of the region. So in Lexington, it's nonpartisan, which is a really special aspect of our city council, and I think very important, because a lot of the work of city council has to do with coalition building. It has to do with figuring out how to create solutions for multiple parts of the city, and how to allocate funds and resources, ideally in an equitable fashion. And the work of city council has a lot to do with some of the nuts and bolts of our city. So we're talking about making sure the city is running and allocating funds accordingly. And the work of city council is also to advocate for practices within our city that will care for and tend to the character and the practice of living there. So that, I mean, we're talking about infill decisions, we're talking about growth, affordable housing, issues around trees and the environment. How do we talk about and work with public safety, with homelessness and housing equity? How do we work with and support local businesses, revenue development, other kinds of economics that affect our city? And then how do we take care of our people and people in terms of like their everyday maneuverings within our city, and then their sense of possibility for their lives within our city. And those aspects that have to do with people also have to do with civic competency, sharing transparently processes of government, sharing information, making sure the systems of government are legible to constituents, and making sure that we are sound stewards of the progress we've made and advocates for the type of city we want to see, and we work on behalf of our constituents in that process. But then we're also driven by our values, because there will be times when very tough decisions have to be made that won't make everybody happy. So those are some of the roles of city council. And so I started to get at the second part of your question, I think, that idea of what it means to me. And some of what I said about advocacy, making sure that our city is vibrant, making sure that our city is inclusive, that we have equitable practices, that we create conduits to power and influence, that we see whose voices are being heard and then whose voices aren't being heard. And I spoke of Jake Gibbs earlier, when I was a renter, I own my house now, but when I was a renter in the city, Jake was the first council person, and I didn't live in his district, who seemed very accessible and who talked to me and took an interest. And then I started to know more about how does city council work, right? So I think that it's about people and explaining their rights and your role in relation to their rights, and being very thoughtful in that process in tandem with other leaders within the community and setting the standard that way.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, if I'm going to be completely transparent, it's like I only know how the upper levels of federal government work, right? And I know it kind of mimics and mirrors from there, but I think just your past and your history of being an educator really shows how you will be able to reach the folks, right, who may not understand what a city council person does, right, or like why it's important to really understand and get to know who that person is that you're going to vote for, rather than just voting for the person who has the most yard signs out, right? Or who runs the local ad. So I really appreciate you taking the time to explain just simply what the city council does. And leading off of that, right, we're in a moment of what the news and the media are categorizing as something that this generation has never been through before, meaning the global pandemic, COVID-19, the coronavirus, right? And I certainly have been learning lessons not only about myself, but from my community and even the nation and the world. And so I'm wondering, Hannah, if and when something like this happens again, right? A crisis, a social upheaval. What lessons have you learned from what's been happening now and in the recent past that can be applied during your position of the city council member, if that makes sense?
Mm-hmm. I think that as a nation and within our city, we've learned a lot of lessons about how tenuous some of our systems are, systems that take care of our people economically and in terms of social safety nets. And this scenario has made very clear some inequities that we knew existed within our society, but now, I mean, the veil is very much lifted.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a lot of budget shortfalls that affect state and local governments, for example. And we have to figure out, how do we ensure that we're resilient and I'll just speak to our city, like as a city. And that means a couple of different forms of resiliency. I think it means understanding our interconnection and connection to other people and our responsibility to them. It means sharing resources. It means working hard, as I mentioned before, to protect the progress we've made as a city while still looking for possibilities that may not have, they may be different possibilities than what we thought we would have, right? And this is something I've been thinking a lot about. I think that we have to think about things like national service. As you know, I've done 3 terms of AmeriCorps myself, and we have the possibility to receive an expanded national service corps with AmeriCorps members. I think our city might have to get creative with how we think about our workforce and with workforce development. And that might mean using AmeriCorps members. That might mean different types of citizen engagement and education, and considering very, very thoughtfully how we can develop our workforce in relation to all the assets we have in this region. I also think that this has caused people to think a lot about their food systems,
Mhm.
where we get our supplies, at what cost,
Yeah.
and thinking about the human costs of our decisions, or our or some of our ingrained ways of doing things as a society. So, I mean, these are just some themes that I have been thinking about. I think that we will have to get very creative with the resources we have, and we have to think really hard about what are our priorities as a city, and what are our responsibilities to people, especially people who are vulnerable, to help more people have a high quality of life here, and of course across the country. And I'm just speaking on a local level
Yeah.
at this conversation. And what
That's,
do we mean by quality of life?
yeah, it's true. I mean, when we talk about quality of life and things like that, it's what I might enjoy doing versus what you might enjoy doing could be totally different. But we should have the opportunities and even the education and the knowledge that we can do those things, right? That there is a bike polo court, not too far from here, where I'm at. And it, it's all about fostering education, like you said, really thinking hard about our structures and the ways that we get things. I mean,
Mhm.
um, Kentucky, I honestly knew not much about Kentucky before I got here about 4 years ago. And it has totally blossomed and changed so many things for me, and how I think about um, the region in and of itself. Um, and I've been totally enjoying my time here in Kentucky and just think it's a blast. When I tell people that I'm getting my PhD in Lexington, Kentucky, they're like, oh, Lexington, like, what do you do there? And actually, there are so many amazing things to do here.
Mhm.
And so that kind of leads into my next question. This is a little more personal, particularly in these tumultuous times, but you can answer this however it was prior or for the future. But what are some things you do in Lexington to let your hair down, relax, rejuvenate, when you're not reading Susan Sontag or
That's a
teaching the
good
future
question.
youth of America or playing with your cute dogs? Um, what are some places you haunt or frequent, that you like to go to around town?
Yeah. I well, things I like to do and places I like to go. It's been a little gloomy out recently. I really love riding my bike. I love riding my bike with no hands. It's like one of these small pleasures.
Yeah.
I think it's really fun. And I love walking around and reading at the same time. This is something that really pleases me.
Have you ever walked into
Um,
anything?
what's that?
Have you ever walked into anything? Wow.
No, I've never walked into anything. I've never bumped into anything or fallen down.
Knock on
Um,
wood.
yeah, it's dangerous, but I have a lot of practice. Um, I yeah, those are things I really like to do. Simple things. At times in my life I've been a big runner, and I was just talking to someone about this recently. Walking and running in a city, especially running though, because you cover a little more ground, you get to see all different parts of it if you're intentional. And I've had some wonderful running partners over the years. One of my running partners I've had for about probably 10 years. And I love like running in different parts of the city at different times of the day, because the city wakes up and goes to sleep differently. And I'm sure, I mean, there's a voyeuristic uh, aspect to that, but it's a little window into other people's lives when you're running through the city. I Yeah, I like to go out for a beer. I mean, in various kind of dive bars around town, as you know. And I really try to take some um, free time to read for pleasure. I have to admit that that's been much harder while running a campaign and whatnot, because there's always more to learn. But it helps me in my mental space and my sense of curiosity and creativity to read and to carve out that time. Those things are really important. And I like to socialize with my friends and have dinner parties and go to events around town. Those are, those things were not at the top of my mind right when I was answering this question, because circumstances have shifted so dramatically. So it felt almost irresponsible to say those things, but they're certainly true. Yeah.
Yeah, a pre-COVID Hannah versus a
Yeah. There's like a hybrid answer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, we've got to find our small pleasures in life now, especially being so physically disconnected from people,
Mhm.
but that doesn't mean we're emotionally disconnected from people. And speaking of time, I think we have time for one more question. And I'm bringing it back to both you and the campaign. And I really want to know, because me personally, I have no interest in running for any sort of office or any sort of elected position like that. And so I really want to know, what has been your favorite thing about the campaign so far, and running for the 3rd District City Council seat?
I would say there are a couple of favorite things. And I want to acknowledge that I'm running a campaign in a very different time than I thought I was when I first started, a different type of campaign, and we've had to adapt the campaign. I have really enjoyed meeting new people in our city, people who I don't know if I would have as quickly or easily come into contact with. I've gotten to learn more history about our city, and I've gotten to understand more diverse experiences of Lexington. Even though I haven't been able to go out and meet as many people as I anticipated, those who I have met, it's been really rewarding.
Yeah.
Um, my Another favorite thing is that I have had, and I mentioned this earlier, I've had to learn a lot. I think for all of my jobs, I've worked a lot of different jobs over the course of my professional life,
Yeah.
and I enjoy a learning curve. I like learning, and it is refreshing even to look back over the course of this campaign, and say, wow, I've learned a lot more about our city. I have gotten to be invested in a different way. I've gotten to hear other people's stories. And I think a really fortunate part about a competitive primary is that you have multiple people who get to be invested differently and get to learn more about our city and how it functions. And I think that if you're really following your values in that process, it's really hard to back down from that. It's hard to take that knowledge and then not do anything with it. I think it's empowering in that way, and that's been very positive and rewarding, to learn and try something new.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that you just seem really exhilarated by the whole process. We popped by, what was it? The Kentucky Native, was it Oktoberfest, I think we
Mm-hmm.
walked through, and you just sort of lit up every time you spoke to somebody about what they were doing, and you weren't overbearing with the fact that you were running for council. Yeah, you'd slip it in here and there, but you were more interested in letting people know so you could be a conduit for their voice, right? As you were saying earlier, like, this is so not about you. This is about making sure that the voices and the people that haven't been heard or listened to, or even understand that they can be heard,
Mm-hmm.
that you're there for them. And so that, I think, is really reflective in that learning curve that you were talking about, because you need to learn things about the multiple types of people that exist here in Lexington. And it seems like you've really been enjoying that process. Uh, and I've really enjoyed this, because we've, hit our mark there. I've really enjoyed this. I enjoyed getting to know you more, through not just as Hannah the candidate, right, but Hannah the person. who is really driving this campaign in this moment. And so, yeah, next Tuesday we'll be back to the regularly scheduled programming of Hannah being the host. Her guest will be Lieutenant Jackie Newman of the Lexington Police Bureau of Special, or Lexington Police Department Bureau of Special Operations. That's a mouthful. And yeah, I just want to thank you and your campaign for having me be the special guest, especially with my bright atomic turquoise hair. And for all you folks who are watching now or will be watching this later, be sure to register to vote. That's coming up. And when June comes, be sure that your voice is heard and you get that ballot in. And yeah, you got any last things to say, Hannah?
Well, Michaela, I want to thank you for your time and for interviewing me. And I also want to express my gratitude to my campaign team. They're amazing. You were asking me about them at the beginning of this conversation, and the people who are engaged with the campaign and volunteering with the campaign, they've been a joy to be around and to work with, and I'm very grateful for them. As well, and for the people who are tuning in. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So,
Sweet. Awesome. Well, thank you.
all right. Bye.
Bye.